Good afternoon. It is Monday, March 24th, 2025. It's no longer Friday, as I was reminded. And this is the House Appropriations Committee. We are here to do our version of final reading. We will get some budget information. We'll get some more budget information, go away and read. We'll check in. And before we leave today, we will have our formal vote on the budget. So we'll start with Emily handing out spreadsheets. I really like how you've color coded them, so I know immediately if it's purple and blue, it's base, and if it's sage green, it's perfect. Coral at one time, other stuff. That's not. We also have some language things that we have to.
Yes, so Emily Byrne from the Joint Fiscal Office. So what we'll start with, we're just going to walk through all the spreadsheets. So based on everything that we remembered that you did at 11 o'clock at night on Friday, adding it into the spreadsheets, making sure it all adds up, cleaning up stuff.
I need one more of the. Yeah. This one. Yeah, you can do this. Thank you.
Cleaning it all up, making sure it all still balanced. So I'm going to share my screen. So yeah, so we'll go through a couple spreadsheets, just show all that information, and then,
so this was as what we did Friday. I'm sure you all remember everything we did Friday.
hopefully I can remember to call on the correct specific ones. Here we go. Following along at home. Okay, so stuff at the top is all the same. On the appropriation changes, so we had the Ethics Commission position, those came out. Pre-charge administrator, that's the updated number that we talked about on Friday, the 110, and then the AG position is down to one position just for the pre-charge program. Transport deputies, I was carrying them in D205, it should be D207, so that got updated over the weekend. Yeah.
On B201, it's just pre-charge diversion. I would take the administrator.
Okay. Oh, good call. All right, I can update that.
Thanks.
Okay, line 17, B225, this is the 112,000 for the conservation districts that was added in. FQHC rate increase. One thing to note on line 24. So when we go through the web report, you will notice, so the community provider rate increases. Because of the way AHS pays community providers, most of it is global commitment match. So about $5 million of that 5.14 is global commitment match. And I have a supplemental sheet I can hand out at the end for people who want to really dig into it. But most of it isn't going to be in B301 global commitment match. There's a little bit of money in B314 and B330 with mental health and Dale for some providers who get just general fund. So there's a little bit, so there's appropriations in those two lines that are just general fund, and those two lines add up. When you add up B301, B330, and B314, you get to the 5.14. So we carried it all in one spot to see the whole thing.
Okay, Trevor.
Yeah, B220, which I don't see here, which is the 450,000 for Center for Crime.
We'll get to that one.
Okay.
Yes, that one, I should point out, that one does not show up on this base increases. It will show up later. Because it was moved from a appropriation to center. So the general fund appropriation was moved from an appropriation to a transfer to their special fund.
Okay.
And then there's going to be a special fund appropriation for B220 out of the special fund. So the money goes into their special fund and then they get appropriated out of the special fund instead of the general fund.
Okay.
That was per the email we got from the overview. But I'll show you that when we get to it, which is going to be actually on the one time sheet. Okay. So what else has changed in terms of things you might know? I broke out on lines 30 and 31. We broke out the two Department of Mental Health changes for the Howard Center and the embedded clinicians in the pediatricians' offices. These are on one line before. So they're broken out and we're showing them slightly differently. Before we had shown them as an addition in the House budget, but they were really a reduction in the governor's budget being added back in. So now they're shown as a reduction on the governor's budget and then sort of backfilled in the House. So they're not being taken out. B in line 33, B318 for the childcare rate increases. This is the change to, it was 5.5, now it's at 4.5. No other changes. Let's put over to the next page. Other changes.
All those were there before.
All over there. Yep. Yeah, that's everything. There, the stabilization reserve, that's updated based on the section C changes that were made. There is the $10 million is sort of set aside for emergency housing, but it's not appropriated anywhere.
What line are you on?
64.
64?
Yeah.
Thank you.
In the pink area.
Pink. And then on the revenue side, our sort of conversations internally at JFO, we realized that the bills with the revenue changes haven't passed yet. So we didn't assign anything to specific revenue changes. We're just carrying the total amount sort of pending further House action. So it shows that you've accounted for $13.5 million worth of changes to revenue available, but not specifically allocating it anywhere since those decisions haven't been finalized yet.
That's the 2 million.
So with that, there is $48.79 million left to
Okay.
cover one-time appropriations.
But just to be clear, Emily, we're writing down specifically line 77, 78 as if we're spending them, but we don't know for sure if the policy committee or the tax committee has approved those choices yet. Is that right?
Yes, I believe there are bills with some of them in them, but they haven't they haven't passed through the whole House body yet.
The social security exemption, military exemption, tax exemption, we've all heard a lot about either one of those, but where we as a committee at this time are budgeting those as if they've passed.
Yes, or they will,
I think-
they were accounted for.
Before that.
Yeah.
Just accounted for,
Right,
right?
so they're not, if these don't pass, this isn't any more cash on the table. This is just an expenditure that we're gonna be having.
If they don't pass,
Yeah.
we have more money. If they do pass, we have less money.
Okay, just to be clear.
Yeah, and so the difference is the 2 million, we had talked about the downtown and village tax credit, which was a recommended increase. So anyway, it just turned out that it was better to look at them in total and just remove the 2 million because we don't know where everything's going to end up.
That's accounted for.
Yep.
Great, thank you for clarification.
Have a new spreadsheet.
No, not yet.
Don't get the,
We can have mine. Is there one extra?
be sure.
Two.
I think we have more JFO people in the room.
Okay, so the next spreadsheet you have in front of you again should look familiar. This is a one-time spreadsheet. So we're assuming there's 136 million from FY 25 that's available for appropriation. There's the reversions of 212, which is probably I'll add a note, so see supplemental sheet. So we added $2 million for Commissioner of Finance and Management from the appropriation to the agency administration for the HFA that they're no longer using, which we reverted some money in the budget adjustment. This reverts another 2 million.
That was to take the place of the AHS federal excess receipts for.
And then there is the bottom of this one base spreadsheet had 48.79 available to cover one-time appropriation. So that if we walk through, these are all updated based on what will be in the bill, as we see it. So the, first one to sort of point out that should look different is B 311 subpart on line 10. 311D subpart 3, this is the urban search and rescue. This is the 475 for urban search and rescue at the Department of Public Safety. And then the next one, and unfortunately, because of the numbering the way it was, blueprint and sash is going to sneak in between B1100 F1, which is the FPR fire apparatus, also for 275.
Now they've been split out. That was in the budget we talked about.
Yeah, they're in the correct places. The other stuff, the recovery residences, I believe is something that was added on late Friday night in G3 for the Department of Health. What else was changed? Last situation advantage. We have the sort of updates in online 27, 28, and 29. Those are the sort of housing updates that were decided late Friday night. Those updates, line 30 is where we have VHIP funding. The $2 million in line 31, this is what came over from the House Corrections and Institutions Committee for
There's the Bs.
fees, yeah. And the Universal Design Study, that's 15,000. VHCD. VH in line 36, we have the additional 5 million for VHCB. These other ones we've talked a lot about. Line 42 and Agency of Agriculture is where we have $500,000 for the Vermonters Feeding Vermonters program. In line 44 is where we have the $2.5 million for the Freedom and Unity grants that were added. And then on line 46, the additional federal match for the Arts Council and the additional $1 million to the Agency of Transportation to begin the implementation of mileage-based user fees.
I don't know if it matters, but you got 245s.
245, I can fix that.
A line.
Yeah.
Oh, that's 45.1 is the other one.
Yes. Thought I caught them all.
Quick catch.
There's always one. That's how we know you're paying attention. Sneak one in.
You get
just
to go touch
intentional.
that one way.
The medical debt came out and I can remove that line if that makes sense.
Probably that.
Okay.
We're not holding it.
Yep. I'll remove that. The additional positions at the Secretary of State's office that are currently in H472.
Yeah.
And then on the transfers below, I'm carrying the cash fund reduction. We've talked about that one-time reduction. And then this is in line 59 where we have the crime victims restitution fund. So this is moving, the money, we had money appropriated. This is where we move the money to the special fund rather than appropriate the general fund and then appropriate the special funds.
And the name on this should be Domestic Violence, Sexual Violence Fund, not the
Yeah.
Restitution Fund.
You can update that. Domestic.
Yeah. We have those details, Trevor.
Yeah, we will update that.
All those funds. Okay.
When all is said and done, there's approximately $1.5 million for, I don't know what.
Hopefully that all sounds familiar to people. And I think before we go to Jim, should we maybe talk about the language that Grady, that we were supposed to talk about Friday and then we sort of forgot to talk about it.
Yes, while we were working over the weekend, we found two pieces of language that we were one is a change that we thought about practically how it would be implemented and it was not implementable as the way it was.
You have copies to give people? But why don't you know that?
Thank you.
That's why we timestamp it.
Grady Nixon Joint Fiscal Office. So on the first four pages of this document in front of you, you'll see various changes to statute relating to the Office of Health Equity and the Health Equity Advisory Commission. This is language that was drafted by Legislative Council in the bill as recommended by the governor. There's a section that does some cleanup to place the Health Equity Advisory Commission in the proper place within the administration. Leg Council reviewed that language and found that there needs to be some more extensive cleanup. So this would be several sections inserted into the bill to achieve a similar purpose as what's in Governor Rec, but just more thorough.
So you may recall that there was some money that was transferred that was in this office in the agency administration that really needed to go to the Department of Health. So there's no money, new money, nothing like that's happening. It's just, it was 500,000 and exactly. And so all it's doing is putting it in the right location, which is the Department of Health, not the Office of Racial Equity. And so this is the language to make sure it's there and the cleanup that's associated with it. Is that kind of what we're talking about? Okay. So does anybody have any questions on that, or we?
Is there still any money being distributed for COVID-19?
Is there more money being distributed for COVID-19?
Yeah.
Does it say COVID-19 in here?
Yeah. On the third page, the 5.
I think that's old, but that's not underlined, so that's not new language. But this establishes the office of the Department of Health and does all the things it needs to then.
Yeah, the last thing that's outlined in yellow, D, the last.
We haven't gotten to that yet. This is the Office of Health Equity that we're talking about right now. The page that you've jumped to,
Well, that's
It's
another
everything.
section.
it's completely different. So all I'm talking about is the Office of Health Equity right now. Everybody okay with that? Okay, all right. Now we'll go to that page.
On the 5th page, so you'll see this is a section CO16 that would be added to the bill. This is amending Act 113, the 2025 budget, as amended by the second budget adjustment act that the House passed. So that's H 489. So that budget adjustment act added sub D that you'll see here, mostly not underlined because if the budget adjustment passes, then that would be in Act 113. So this sub D notwithstands 32 VSA C, which is the general fund balance reserve and pension sweep at the end of year closeout. In the Budget Adjustment Act, it would reserve up to $133,500,000 for permanent housing, property tax relief, and other public interest purposes. This language here would update that number in the budget to 136 million.
So in the budget adjustment, this was the construct that the administration preferred. There's a Senate construct and a House construct, and this was the House construct. And all we're doing is updating the number now that we have better information. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay.
On the final page of the document, this is a section B1101 relating to FY25 closeout that would be added to the budget. So this would say that after you fulfill the requirements of 32.
Can we back up 1 second? When we did this on Friday, we had talked about putting the money into the general fund balance reserve. When JFO did the work over the weekend, it was thought through putting it in the once you put it in the balance reserve, it's really hard to get out. Given the uncertainty that's coming from the federal government, we talked through and thought that it didn't make sense to put it in the balance reserve and then add a whole bunch of language that made it really complicated to get it out. So this was the proposal to, like, rather than put it there, to set it aside for the sort of the same purpose, the same federal funding issues. But this is that structure, but
Okay,
keep going.
thank you.
Sorry.
So that goes into a reserve.
So everything, no, so it's not. So this is what Grady will explain.
Okay.
First, everything goes to the reserves.
So 32 VSA 308 is the general fund stabilization reserve. So this language would say, first fulfill that requirement, and then fulfill the requirements of Act 113 D013, which is the language you saw on the prior page, that 136 million. And then if any balance remains, notwithstand 32 VSA 308C, which goes directs money to the balance reserve and the pensions in that statutory construct. So rather than do that, Finance and Management reserve remaining funds for future appropriations to address potential federal funding shortfalls. In sub B, while the General Assembly is not in session, the Joint Fiscal Committee would have the ability to make recommendations to the Emergency Board on the transfer of those remaining funds that are reserved after fulfilling the requirements of the General Fund Stabilization Reserve and Section D103, that 136 million reserve. And then the E-Board would be authorized to transfer funds per JFC recommendations.
So this is a way of trying to deal with what's coming down the road in a way that is not so inflexible that we can't get at the funds that we need to get at when we need to get at. Any questions about this, Lynn?
Yeah, can you just go over reserves? We've got a budget stabilization reserve, that is 308.
Yes.
And you've got 308C,
Which is the balance reserve and then the statutory allocation, 25 to pensions and 25.
so that comes out of its 308C.
Yes.
3208C is the mechanism to do that, and it creates the general fund balance reserve. So
The general fund balance reserve is also known as the rainy day fund. And so it's slightly different than the general fund stabilization reserve, right? Which is statutorily 5% of appropriations. It needs to be filled, and we keep that pretty much filled.
Are there, I'm assuming there are different rules regarding each fund and who can touch them and under what circumstances?
correct. The stabilization reserve is the one that like doesn't get touched ever, really. That's the first 5%. That's 5% of prior year appropriations. The balance reserve is the one that's a little bit more flexible. That's the sort of rainy day fund. That's the sort of next 5% that gets reserved. It's not at 5% at this point. There's sort of like there's a mechanism to fill it up, which is the General Assembly transfers money to it, or the year-end construct. So there's about $98 million in that one right now. And so the language that's in the budget about what the Joint Fiscal Committee will have ability to do sort of talks about how they can access that stabilization, that balance reserve if needed.
How much money is in the stabilization?
It's 300 and something.
No, the stabilization reserve is at 118, 120 at the end of projected 120 million at the end of FY 2025, based on,
The 120 there, that's hard to get at.
yeah,
90, whatever,
98 in the the rainy day
90
fund.
days.
Yeah.
That's 200 million.
Yeah.
That's it.
The Human Services Caseload Reserve is another one that has $94.5 million in it. That one is sort of held, there's two functions with the Human Services Caseload Reserve. One is the Medicaid claims tail. So in the event we had to, there's usually 3 months of claims that you have to pay out. So if anything changed that's sort of reserved there to deal with that liability. And then there's just also other money that goes in and out.
What happens if this language is not in here? What does it default to?
It defaults to 308C, which would mean any money over and above what's reserved in the budget adjustment for the next fiscal year would go, 50% would go to the rainy day fund, the balance reserve, and then the remaining 50% gets split between the teacher's pension and the state employee's pension.
I remember that part. As the bill moves forward in the Senate, if revenues continue to come in a little over projection, I assume we could insert like some kind of contingent list if we collectively chose to do that, correct?
We absolutely could. And at the same time, we'll have more information and maybe about what's happening in Washington,
Sure.
because I'm imagining that could be our first priority, depending upon where it is. Right. Yep.
How much is on the human service caseload reserve again?
94 million. Projected at the end of FY 25, 94.
So let's imagine the worst happens with the federal government, and we're all hearing different numbers in different places. So what happens if during fiscal year 2025, we need to use all that money in order to make this work, or we have a choice, we can either, or question is, do we have a choice to use all that money, deplete our reserves, fulfill the budget? Do we have to perhaps come in and cut the budget in order to make that work, and you'll have the magical math numbers so that if there's
Are we on 5? We are not. Oh, okay, great. It fooled us.
There's language in the budget that sort of addresses, like, if it's by this much, this is what happens. If it's this much, joint fiscal committee and the emergency board get involved. And if it's anything more than that, then the general assembly has to come back because it's a big enough change. And then the general assembly or the joint fiscal committee, depending, sort of has access to different reserves at different levels, depending on how big the change is. If there was a decision by whichever body's in charge to, I don't think the joint fiscal committee couldn't be in a situation where they can deplete those two reserves. That would require statutory approval. If the legislature came back and decided to do that, it would depend. So there's like two sort of functions of that, right? Statute says that stabilization reserve has to be at 5% of prior year appropriations. So then you would have to refill it, right? It's one time, when it's in the stabilization, in a reserve, it is one-time money, right? There is no like refilling mechanism to that. So you would have to either change the law that said your stabilization reserve was different, or you would have to meet the requirements of statute and refill that reserve.
Which would be. We don't need to hear ourselves twice. At least I don't. That would mean finding $98 million to fill the reserve, assuming the same appropriation would be there, or possibly more.
at a time when
Right,
the budget has to be, presumably would have to be slashed to the bone.
that's right. So it may not be 98, it might be 68, but yes, exactly. Which is why I think that doesn't get used very much.
Yes, it's never been utilized. Stabilization reserve has to be at 5% of prior year appropriations. The rainy day fund, the balance reserve, has a statutory maximum, like a goal of 5% of prior year appropriations. It's not at 5% of prior year appropriations. So there is some, if that one were to get used, there's no requirement to automatically refill that one. The Human Services Caseload Reserve similar. I think if it gets used, there's not the same requirement that it automatically get backfilled, right? It would depend on what you use it for, I think.
John?
Just as a reminder, because we talked about this somewhat on Friday here, but what would be the level of cuts that we might experience from the federal government that trigger us to come back? Perhaps redo a portion.
Right, I think it's 4% of prior year of the January it'll be the July e-board's adopted revenue forecast that would trigger.
The governor can call us back
Right.
anytime, with or without a trigger.
Right.
But that trigger, that would be like, definitely you're coming back, I guess.
And then there was another, I think Representative Stevens mentioned the sort of bond rating and all that stuff, right? I think any utilization of the reserves would, be something that the rating agencies would look at in terms of like, is there, one of the things that my understanding that helps us with our bond rating is that we have these reserves and that we are very judicious about when they get used and for what purpose. To the extent that that means they haven't been used at all, right? It means that they're there for that, when they're really truly needed. So I think two things would probably happen. There'd be, we'd be one of 50 states and 6 territories in DC that would be subject to having to deal with this, right? So it would be sort of a national thing that rating agencies would be looking at across the country. Also, it would sort of just depend on what the plan was in terms of how it impacted the rating. In terms of like, how would it get refilled when all that sort of stuff would play out over the next couple of years, but the sort of using those funds, does raise questions by the rating agencies and is something that they would look at and examine in terms of how they, what they would publish for the next credit rating for the state.
Thanks.
The only other, to be thorough, there is one other reserve, the famous 2753 reserve, which we are moving, I think, $5 million to next year, right? That one is really just specifically for the liability of the 27th payroll when that happens every 12 years, and then the 53rd week of Medicaid, which happens every 5 to 6 years. But that money is specifically dedicated for that.
So it's just smooths it all out. So it's the same amount every year and we don't suddenly have to pay $30, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Once every 7 years. We just agree on that. So, right.
And right now that has, at the end of fiscal 25, it's projected to have $14 million in it. You're going to add, this budget contemplates adding another 5.7. So it'll get to about 20 at the end of FY 26. And I can't remember when the next.
So this is
pay period.
strictly about the closeout and how we want to do it and signaling that it's our intent to have some money to be used in the event of things happening, federal funding. Okay, people all right with that? Does that make sense? All right.
Is there any speculation or any assessment of what the worst case scenario might be?
The worst case scenario is we lose $3.1 billion. We don't have any of that. That's a different, so we could go down a rabbit hole of, well, what if they reduce these rates here? What if they change the match here? What if they, and
So, like we talked about hospitals and whatever, how much they should have in reserve. Does the amount that we have in reserve seem like a reasonable amount given the size of state government?
well, it normally is.
Great.
But that's why we have this closeout language, proposing this closeout language, so that in the event that, some of the worst happens, then we have access to funds. Okay, so it sounds like we can go with this language. I'm not hearing otherwise, so thank you, Grady. And we will, just since we're speaking of reserves, Jim met with Joint Fiscal Office and Bryn Hare and Rep. Kornheiser to talk about the Joint Fiscal Committee and e-board language that we looked at on Friday. I'm sure you've all memorized it. But anyway, there's some tweaks that are gonna come to that, and we will get a piece of language to take a look at. So I'm not sure quite when that's gonna be this afternoon, but it will be this afternoon. And I think everybody's come to agreement on that, and if all those people came to agreement, I'm inclined to come to agreement with the rest of them, so we'll see what that says. So that's what we did on Friday. And so Jim, as you all know, did some work over the weekend and,
I was trying to get at least me to a yes, maybe Wayne as well. To try to help move forward. I do appreciate, I mean, we all, to be honest, we all look at things very differently. That includes me as a House Republican in the area I represent. That includes, the governor's administration. We look at things differently, and all of you look at things differently. So it's not easy to thread that needle sometimes. But having said that, when I left Friday, I was concerned about a couple things. One was the money that was reduced in the state's attorney budget as proposed. There were 650,000 of vacancies, which they said they didn't have, which means they would have to actually reduce some staff to accomplish that line item. And my personal feeling, I think Wayne agrees, that we need all hands on decks with public safety. And if we don't have state's attorneys, that they've already got a huge backlog. And we need to at least maintain. They had asked, obviously, for a number of new positions on top of this, and that's just wasn't in the cards right now. So I propose putting the $650,000 back into their budget. I also have had some communication with the Criminal Justice Council, which had a number of asks, like everyone else, with new positions and whatnot. But one that struck me that was perhaps relatively easy to do was a canine trainer. They do canine training for police dogs and whatnot, which can be extraordinarily valuable when you're doing search and rescue, hunting for someone that's going through the woods, whatever. Currently, because they don't have in the budget for a position for that, they use an outside contractor, and that costs them $75,000 for, one session for part of the year. And as a result, even the state police, which need this training, have been, my understanding is using services training down in Connecticut. So there's some potential savings that I can't identify what they are with the state police going forward. But anyhow, so they're spending $75,000. The position we estimate all included is about $115,000. So there's a $40,000 gap, but that would give us year-round training, which they believe they need, and I think it ultimately will save some money for the state police. So I put $40,000 back into Criminal Justice Council, and then the food bank, because it was the end of the day and because we ran out of money, we only had $500,000 in that Vermont Feeding Vermonters budget. And I was going back to a request early on in the session where they had asked for $1.75 million of base funding in the emergency management. We formed a more formal partnership. When we have an emergency, that they're there on call with the necessarily food, water, whatever else they need to do. Obviously, it would continue to help their operations. So I, couldn't come up with 1.75, so I put $500,000 towards that. And then to offset, because we didn't want to add.
So the total of that was.
The total of that was $1.19 million, $1,190,000 of addition. And reductions, I have a short list. As you might remember, we are way behind in our radios, and number of radios, and state police are having issues. So the administration had put $920,000 behind funding, in addition to an ongoing base funding, so that we don't get in this situation again. And I trimmed that by 120,000. So public safety may not be happy with me on that point, but I think that was a doable number. We would still have 800,000 in that area at one time, plus the ongoing base budget. And then as I shared last week, I'm not sure it's the place for state government to be funding private business organizations, however they were. And I've got a past with running a business trade association, and I would have loved state money to help PT overhead, but I just have a hang up on that. But understanding that people want to help this, I reduced that 250,000 by 50,000, so 200,000 is still just a small organization, but still I think beneficial to that group. The large part of the money that I needed, I took from the $2.5 million that we allocated to that Freedom and Unity Scholarship Program. I talked to John Kasenska, who has VSAC, and from his conversations with VSAC, he said if we started with $1.5 million, that while it wasn't the initial $5 million they were asking for, it would enable the program to get up and going. And if we can do more in the future, we can. And then the last thing was to make my numbers balance. Sorry, Tiff, we reduced the embedded clinicians in the pediatric offices by 20,000. So it ended up with the same total, $1,190,000.
Thanks for working on that over the weekend, Jim. People have questions, comments, anything you want to say about that?
I'm not happy. I think I was the last one called because you probably knew I wasn't coming.
Well, I think I was the first one. No, Jim asked me about it here. I mean, the goal here was to get started with something that we don't have here. There's a couple of things that come to an end here clearly. I was in the VSAC proposal here. That's what we discussed. I haven't discussed that directly with VSAC here, but they know that, we're still kind of playing with some numbers here for sure.
Right.
Kind of gave them a little bit of a heads up that things might change, just depending on what other homework Jim was doing here over the weekend.
Yeah.
Can I go back over a couple of things? What for public safety you cut out?
You have a little spreadsheet?
I have the spreadsheet, I'm writing on it.
A little bit.
No, I have a spreadsheet from Jim.
No,
I can send that to you.
okay.
It's there was a one-time, whatever that one-time piece is. It had $920,000 for to jumpstart the radio replacement. There's line 9 on the spreadsheet that have all this mobile portable radio equipment. They have a lot of radios that are.
Well, I understand.
Yeah.
I don't have any concern about putting money toward like the state's attorneys.
Yeah.
Or any of these things. I'm just trying to figure out what the numbers are. So what did you do with the 920?
I shaved it by 120,000. So
So
the
it's
total,
800.
new total would be, if we accept this, would be 800,000. And I'll just add, I mean, none of us will come with the same budget blueprint if we were doing them individually. And I certainly, if just left to my druthers, would make other changes. But, at the end of the day, I was trying to get to a point that a couple of us harder to please people would get on board. So, and I did feel the state's attorney part in particular was very important. So I don't expect everybody to love every piece of what I put down, just trying to get forward. In spite of the fact that it's very easy to vote no, I did want to get to a yes.
And this will get you there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Huh?
The Professionals of Color Network was as recommended by the administration. Did you reach out to anybody, an advocate or a member of the network or their board of directors to discuss a potential cut?
No.
So it's just because it was there?
Yes, this is new money, from my understanding.
No. They've been granted money in the past, but
Okay.
Trevor?
Yeah, just a comment. I appreciate Representative Harrison putting this together, trying to get us to a place where hopefully we can all agree. I agree with Jim that if we individually had to go away and presentation on this, it might look a little different for all of us. But I'm okay with this. I'm particularly glad to see us do something for the state's attorneys. It's growing into a significant issue. And I think that's a really good addition to the budget. So thank you.
Jim mentioned that to me too. We can't afford to lose. We have to reduce. Our conversation. Agree.
Any other comments? Lynn, I sent that to you. Spreadsheets. So, all right, so if I don't hear.
Well, I just want to let people know that I talked with the healthcare committee chair and just broached the cut made to the embedded clinicians and and that's it's $20,000 and that is that she is okay with that. So
All right. So in that case, what I recommend we do is in a minute, we'll go off live. Emily will print new spreadsheets. We'll take a look at that. And then we will have spreadsheets, a web report and language, and then we all get to go in and read something.
I
Lynn,
just ask one question. All of these changes are one time.
if it's on the one-time list, it's one time. Then you have to look at what the heading is on the spreadsheet you're looking at. Oh, then this time.
Let's discuss the.
Yes, I believe.
They're all one time. And I'm
No, maybe they're
Food
not.
bank is base.
Food
Food
bank.
bank is base, sorry.
And the criminal justice council is base. Obviously, the state's attorney is in their base budget, the vacancy state,
And everything else is happening
at one time.
one time.
But as we heard in the past few weeks, there's a fair amount of one time that there's
A lot of base
capacity in the base that was used
for
for
one
one-time expenditures.
Right, about 70 million of base is used.
So in some respects, it's for this year, it doesn't matter what column, but in the future, but for
Yeah.
now, it doesn't.
So I'm gonna check with Emily Byrne. Is 2:30, 2:35? What time do you want us to come back, Emily? 2:45, you tell me.
30.